Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you've all enjoyed the IUCN UK Peatland Programme Conference 2020 so far. I realise it's a little bit late in the afternoon, so hopefully we'll keep this interesting for you as we go forwards. And I'm hoping to talk about something which you are aware of, but may not necessarily consider in terms of your approach into peatland works, be it restoration or conservation works or land management. We're going to talk about some heritage and archaeological, historical and cultural heritage that we can find in peatland environments. So I'm here with Dr. Abby Flint, who you might be able to see on screen also, depending upon your video settings. And Abby Flint works with me at the University of Bradford on a programme of research called Wetland Archaeology in Contested Environments. So looking at the archaeology historical resources from wetlands in the UK, in Ireland with Ben Geary from University College Cork, who will hopefully also be joining us this evening, and also partners over in the Netherlands, based at the University of Wageningen, Dr. Roy van Beek and Rowan van Lenen. And we'll have some information from them later on in the session as well. So to try and explain a little bit more of the heritage from peatlands, we decided to go and do a virtual field trip in Ilkley Moor, which is not far from Bradford. So Ilkley Moor is the location signified by the red pin drop on the screen there. So pretty much northern central England, slap bang in the middle of a country, part of the Pennine district area in terms of the upland area that we have, based as an upland moor in between the Aire Valley and the Wharfe Valley, a nice little upland raised moorland area, which also contains quite a wide variety of archaeological and heritage material. So we're going to have a look at a few different pieces. Some images on screen now, various bits of heritage. The image on the left-hand side is a piece of carved rock art. You can see some symbols and materials cut into the rock surface, which is partially overgrown by the grass from the surrounding area. This probably relates to the Neolithic, so thinking about 3000 through to 2500 BC, so 4500 to 5000 years old. Moving in one slide, we have the same feature in the middle slide and the right-hand slide. I've always interpreted this as being a trigonometry point. So we were going to go and record this as part of a trig system. One of the faces of a rock pillar has TP engraved on the side, which would indicate it was a trigonometry point. But on the surface, top surface, there is no, there's none of the associated items you would expect for a trig point. So it's a different sort of marker, but still something heritage orientated. And when we were looking at the item, the stone, and recording it, you can just about make out a series of other pillars continuing across the moorland, progressing further back. So just to the upper right-hand side of Tom's head, who's doing the photography, you can see another stone pillar stood up, about 1.5 inches higher. There's another small pillar on there, and it's actually part of a field boundary. So this is one of the boundary divisions occurring up on the top of the moorland area, dividing the moor between Ilkley district and Bradford district. So part of a different heritage than we're expecting during a recording process. Excuse me, but there are a number of other items which we'll come to in a short while. The aim of the recording project was to get up onto the top of the moor and to record some of the more obvious features that we have in terms of the archaeology. One of those is this large standing stone circle. We're doing some scans. We'll start seeing some scans and some of the recording parts of the survey in a second as we progress through. But you can see how open this moorland landscape is, quite high. We've got hill peaks around on the other side of the Aire Valley, to the north side, to the south side. On the opposite side, right-hand side of the picture on screen, we have the Keighley area and Bradford district occurring in the a further distance. Across in about the centre of the image, we're looking across towards Leeds on the eastern side of the moor. So on the way up to the top of the moor, where we're going to be the 12 Apostles Standing Stone Circle, there's actually a few bits of more recent heritage which are incorporated into the landscape. One of those is this carved figurehead face that you can see on screen in the centre. This is actually a three-dimensional photogrammetry scan recording, which if you use the link on the bottom there, you can access the three-dimensional model on screen. If you have a Google VR headset or other similar material and equipment, you can explore in 3 dimensions. I'll post these links up after the session onto the pinboard, so you can access them after. Don't worry about writing down those links. They will be available afterwards. But we've also got a quick little video of this feature. So if we could play the first video now, please. So here we are up on Ilkley Moor looking for some heritage, and you might be tempted to think that heritage is related to old things, but here we've got a nice carving which is fairly recently done as part of a poetry trail linking to general engagement in the landscape, taking walks through peatlands. People can deposit poetry in a little poetry box which is just around the corner further down the stream, but it means that heritage isn't a static thing in terms of people's engagement with peatlands. So we're not just thinking about past things, but contemporary things which are being inserted in creating heritage for the future as well. So one of the parts that we're trying to get across with the interpretation of heritage in the moorlands is that from an archaeological perspective or a heritage perspective, we're often confined by a perspective of heritage being something static, being something which is in the past. Whereas in actual fact, heritage all around us is much more contemporary. It's being created on a daily basis. It's being created in the contemporary world, and the things which we do today may well become aspects of heritage in the future. So we don't need to think about heritage as being purely past items. We can have much more up-to-date contemporary heritage, which should also be recorded as we go forwards, so we have a record of this in the future. And if we're considering invasive works, which go into peatland and moorland locations, then we will start to encounter both potentially contemporary heritage, but also more ancient and historic heritage. So one of the features that came as a bit of a surprise to me as we were going across the moorland was actually some restoration work which is ongoing at present time, and had just been instigated recently prior to the field trip up on Ilkley Moor, post October when it went up last time, but pre-November. So if we could play video 2 now, please. So just making our way to the next site for recording, and encountered some peat work. So clearly we've got some restoration works going on for the footpath linking across the moors. So just having a quick look around and encountered some timber. This is the sort of thing you might come across if you're doing excavation work up on the moors. You might come across bits of wood like this. It looks as if this is fairly modern timber. It looks like a more recent plank than anything historic or archaeological, but you do need to be aware if you are doing peat works, you may well encounter bits of historical timber like this, and it would be a nice idea to contact your local archaeologist to have a look at these bits of timber if they do come out, because it could well be of historic and archaeological interest. Depositing them on the surface like this isn't the best way to aid preservation of those timbers. They'll rapidly dry out and desiccate and disintegrate. So when we were on the moors, that actually, as I said, came as a surprise to me to see that that drainage channel cut around the footpath there. That modern footpath has been inserted as part of a Millennium Walk linking across the moor. So those modern flagstones, reused flagstones from other areas in the location, but moved up onto the moors to allow a more robust footpath to exist across the wetter areas of the peatland. And previous times when we've been up for walks, they've been quite unstable and started to sink into the peat. So that drainage ditch, I think, is there most likely to aid in restoration of the footpath. But as I said in the video, there is some timbers coming out of there. And initially, when I considered that, I was fairly dismissive of those timbers. I didn't think they were particularly heritage orientated. But as I've thought more recently in the last couple of days and the last weeks about the heritage, I've started to consider actually maybe they are more heritage relevant, because they do partially record previous work which have gone on in the peatland. They could well be related to the installation of that footpath, the Millennium Footpath, so the last 20 years worth of works going on there. But they are still part of the heritage of a moorland. They should still potentially be recorded as part of that heritage. And part of the reasoning for changing my opinions of, as I initially say, quite dismissive of those modern timbers, is from the work of Rowan and Roy in the Netherlands at Wageningen, looking at Schokland in the Netherlands, which is a little bit of a transfer away from Ilkley Moor across into the Netherlands. We can see Schokland is occurring just by this pinpoint in the centre of the Netherlands. We have large water inlets, and it used to be a substantial peatland environment. If we look at the 13th century, then we have a substantial area of peat growing, which was gradually shrinking through towards the 16th century and into the 17th century as a result of inundation. This area was flooded by ingressing seawater, and the peat was submerged until we ended up with a tiny, tiny little island in the 19th century, a mass movement of people away from the area. So we'd have an area like this. This is the standing upland part of Schokland with the sea ingress in the areas around. In the 1940s, a dam was built across and this area was drained, resulting in a much more terrestrial landscape. And the image on the right-hand side, that was just after drainage of the basin and following some heavy rainfall, which is why it's really wet on the surface there, you can see. This is the contemporary situation that we have. The main Schokland Island is this part occurring in the centre of the perimeter walkway around, and you can see the rest of the surrounding area has been converted into arable agricultural land. The nice dark staining from the use of a peat as the primary growing matrix of substance for the agricultural fields. You can still see how wet the rest of the area is, though. All of the small lagoons and ponds occurring across the area, with the sea dam in the top side of the image there. So how high is this island? This is the main Schokland Island, part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And you can see it's not actually particularly high at all, 1 or 2 meters above the surrounding flat plain area. So very marginally elevated above the surrounding flat plain, but a very high water table in that area. But as we said, only started to be inundated from 13th, 16th, 17th century in particular. Sorry, and prior to that, very much a terrestrial usable landscape for human populations. So we have significant cultural heritage and heritage remains in that area, extending from prehistory right up until the medieval time period, including dugout canoes, these timber that you can see on the left-hand side, burials, so human remains with associated archaeological materials, and other indications for human activities, pottery, depositions, wagon wheels, so indications of transport through the area, in addition to the medieval and post-medieval remains of settlement. Some of the more surprising heritage in that area we find would be this item, which it's an inland harbour. So this is a harbour defence wall with guidance buoy remains and timber guidance structures, palisades. which were part of a harbour on Shockland, which obviously post drainage of the area is no longer functional. So we have a harbour which is now surrounded by complete primarily terrestrial environment, but we have those remains there still. And we also have remains on the slightly raised island areas related to earlier occupations on the area. Apologies. So why did Shockland make me start to think actually we should be thinking about these bits of more recent heritage from Ilkley Moor, the small drainage channel cuttings? Well, as we've spoken about, Shockland was a drained environment. So there are numerous drainage channels, dikes, drainage ditches, palisades found within that peatland environment, which are all related to more recent and historic drainage of the area. Just because they are recent remains doesn't mean they don't qualify as heritage. So I think we should start to consider any of the remains that we come across in terms of peatland works as heritage, be they older remains such as this Neolithic rock art, the same picture we saw before, but a 3D model scan in this instance, or the more recent timbers related to installation of contemporary footpaths still in use today. Are all part of the heritage record of human interventions in those peatland landscapes. And that's not to diminish the significance of the archaeological remains, but to complement them. The archaeological remains are exceptionally valid, as are the more recent remains. And just in terms of the archaeological remains, this is the 12 Apostles standing stone circle, which was the primary target point we went up to scan. This again is a three-dimensional model available via the link I'll post on the chat box afterwards. But there's also a quick little video which we did of this monument. If you could play video number 3, please. So this is a bit more visible heritage. This is nicely standing up. You can see around the standing stone circle. So this relates to about Bronze Age. So looking around 2,500 BC for this sort of feature. It's quite enigmatic, don't really know what they're for, but quite obvious in the landscape. So reused repeatedly across the time periods. Recently, when I've been up, I've been seeing people using these as picnic benches, as wind shelters, without really understanding the concept of it as a standing stone circle or a scheduled monument. But really interesting features in the landscape to see, often used as way markers or land points as well for runners going through the area. So quite an interesting heritage feature in terms of archaeological heritage rather than recent heritage, but reused in more recent time periods and given new meanings by contemporary populations as well. So the 12 Apostles there, the standing stone circle, is quite an obvious feature in the peatland and moorland environment, much more obvious than the engraved stones, which are very much at ground level, sometimes quite hard to spot. But the standing stones are upright features, quite easy to spot. It means they're also quite easy to use for different functions. As I mentioned in the video, I've seen people up there using them as picnic benches, using them as windbreaks when I've been up there just to shelter away from the wind a little bit. So multiple reuses of items for contemporary functions, but also thinking about these historically, it would have been quite nice for waymarkers, guidance points, in addition to a variety of other potentially ritualistic or functional aspects. If we're also looking for other indications of engagement in these upland, peatland, moorland locations, then one of the main activity indicators that we might come across are wall features. So standing wall features, either very obvious or more ephemeral. And we have some of these up on Ilkley Moor. They are found around upland moorlands in the UK. So if you're down on Dartmoor, or Exmoor, you may well find field boundaries marked by standing stones and linear stone features. In the Peak District, you'll find other stone features and field boundaries and markers occurring, sometimes distinctly connected, sometimes decidedly eroded or much more ephemeral. And thinking back to the supposed trigonometry point, which is actually the field boundary, you might find a segmented line of standing stones. We do have quite a nice example up on Ilkley Moor, which we've got some images on screen of. Again, all of these are models, which I'll post links to on the chat box. The one on the left-hand side, the bright green one, that is it's a laser scan combined with photographic survey. So it is, the moor is quite green at times. You can see from the pictures on the right hand side, but it's not quite that green. There's a colouring issue occurred in the laser scan there. The two on the right hand side, the 360 photograph and the model on the top, they give an indication of the current situation. And there is another video, so if we could play the next video, please. So looking at more heritage features, upstanding features, you can see stone wall coming around here. On the opposite side, they've got a clearance cairn, most likely for a collection of stones out of a field. You can see this part of the wall is quite nice and visible. Just move a little bit further around, then it becomes much more ephemeral in what is left as remnants. So we could envisage this has been nicely redressed and recently modified. This is more naturally eroded stone. But if you look on the Google Earth view, the top-down view, then you can actually see this has a significantly large enclosure. You can see the wall continuing around on the right-hand side down to the end there, back up past my feet, continuing around up to where my colleagues are doing the scanning, continuing around further on down to the path on the other side, into the heather, and then would loop back around to this side. So we can see both the obvious parts of the heritage, but then the less obvious alignments. So these just look like field stones, and as I say, that's been moved into the clearance cairn on this side. So you might encounter a variety of bits of heritage. Could be very ephemeral, could be recently modified and redefined, or could even be the clearance cairns or other cairns found in the fields which are repeatedly used over time and modified and established and expanded and then reduced as stones are taken away to elsewhere. So again, thinking in terms of non-static heritage, it changes from being very much a historic feature to a more recent feature of the landscape as we look around. So the video there showed how the wall features can be quite obvious, but also very much more indistinct in the environment. So part of that enclosure feature, again, probably Neolithic to Bronze Age, so 3000 to 2000 BC, 4000 to 5000 years old. Most likely some of that wall has been reconstructed. You saw the nicely dressed sections. That's been reconstructed and modified to make it more obvious in the landscape, particularly the upper right-hand image that you have on screen there. Where it's been eroded and more ephemeral in the landscape, part of that will be due to vegetation growth overcoming the stones themselves, could be related to general movement features, but also people reusing that stone for other purposes. If you have an obvious enclosure feature or other more malleable portable stones, then they are quite nicely a useful building resource. So people have just gone and acquired bits of those stone and taken them for reuse in features elsewhere on the moorland. And we saw that small little clearance cairn at the end there, where stones have been removed from a general field and placed into a mound. And cairn features are something that we find quite typically in upland areas. The model on the left-hand side is the same one which is adjacent to the circular enclosure. On the right-hand side, this is again from Ilkley Moor, about 500 meters or so from the enclosure. much larger. You can see that this cairn is significantly larger in terms of size. Every time I've been up to the moor, it has changed in terms of size. So people often ask when we go on the field trips, what is a cairn for? What is the function of a cairn? Could be a burial monument, could be a way marker, could be a boundary marker, could serve a variety of locational functions. Some of them, archaeologically or historically, may well be burial monuments, but there is no guarantee that every cairn was a burial monument. And we know that from modern practices, people do add stones to these cairns, they do remove stones from these cairns. This one is directly adjacent to part of the Millennium Way, the large walking route and the Transpennine route. So it is a significant location on walking. And the most recent addition to this has been the balanced stone top. That is not a feature I've seen up there before, but it is something which is demonstrating the reuse of this monument by people as they go past and engage with the area. We have one on the top, there's also one just occurring on the side, and another one just around the other side as well. So it's a continual engagement with the feature, and it may well grow further, it may well disappear more. We shall see how it progresses in the future. In addition to the smaller cairns, the larger cairns, the big standing stone features of field boundaries, the smaller rock art. There is occasionally some bigger bits of rock art that we find as well, which are very obvious in the landscape, such as this model on screen. This is a large, substantial rock art feature with cup and ring marks on the surface, which you can see picked out. So there is a video to go of this one as well, please. So one more piece of heritage to look at, just some additional rock art, standing isolated stone. Here we have large rock panel with a series of rock art marks made onto cup and ring marks and cup marks extending across this panel. All of the historic information is on the upper surface, nothing on the sides of older interest. Those items on the top are Neolithic date, bits around the base are more recent graffiti and graffito artwork. Again, this side you can see illuminated partially up on the top there, some additional cup marks into the rock. So this would be termed as mobiliary art in essence, because it is potentially mobile if you have enough people. It's not a static rock essentially. So there was a quick just overview of that large rock art panel at the end there. You could see from video some of the more recent engagements with that stone in terms of graffiti and graffito. You might ask, what is the difference between graffiti and graffito? There is no particular difference, apart from one is deemed as of potential historic interest, and one is the modern term for unwanted artwork. So we do need to start considering how the graffiti we see up there will be preserved in the historical and heritage record as we go forwards in the future. All of those bits of graffiti will eventually become part of the heritage record associated with that item. You could also see there the change from the morning on the moor when we started off with the video by the modern drainage cutting, nice and icy and frosty in the water. By the late afternoon, very problematic actually for recording these features because of the low angle of sunlight, made it quite problematic to record. But that is a side feature. So I think the main point that I've tried to highlight as we've gone through the virtual field trip on Ilkley Moor with the quick excursion over to Shockland is that if we're thinking about heritage in environments, then heritage isn't just the archaeological or the historical materials that we can see and might encounter when we're working in peatland areas. It's also the contemporary heritage which is ongoing today, and we should start to consider how the things we do today will be incorporated as heritage record in the future. So how will the heritage appear in the future? How are people engaging with the peatland environments? How will that be incorporated and recorded as heritage aspects? And part of that will include things which we can see, but also those which we cannot see. What will be the hidden heritage as we go forwards, and also the intangible heritage, so the wider heritage associated with peat moors, which are not physical in terms of their remains, the artwork, the literature, the language that goes along with engagements in the peatland environments. So hopefully it's given you a little bit of an insight into different aspects of heritage which you may encounter. I know I've certainly not covered all of the varieties of heritage which are included in peatlands, certainly from an archaeological or a historical perspective. One of their key aspects as heritage areas is with the paleo-environmental record, but that is very difficult to get across in terms of a virtual field trip, because it's things which you can't typically see. It's pollen analysis, which you need labs and microscopes to undertake, but are very critical to our understanding of past environments and past climates. And if we look to mitigate climate change as we go forwards with peatland restoration works and conservation works, then much of the understanding that we gain of past climates comes from peatland environments in the UK and the near continent. And I'm sure Ben Geary, who's joined us on the panel, will be able to answer any questions about the paleo-environmental record that you might have. So that is the end of our quick excursion to Ilkley Moor. Hopefully you've enjoyed the videos. As I say, I will post those model links on the chat board, so you can explore those at your leisure later on. But I would like to invite any questions that we might have from the audience, but either myself or Abby or Dr. Ben Geary can also look to answer. So thank you very much for your attention and your time in listening this evening. I hope you found it useful, but please do ask questions if you have any.
Great stuff. Thank you, Ben. That was incredibly useful, and I do like the sort of dimension of contemporary graffito, as I've now learned. So you'll be looking forward to your first Banksy on one of your rocks. Stop Tim Tom from stealing it. We've got obviously this panel now. Got 15 minutes to answer questions. We've had two big questions come in. So I'm going to probably put these to both of you, Ben and Abby. You let me know if you've got something else to add. So the first question is around, I suppose it's this point about the landscape, understanding the landscape within which the artifacts are found. What do you know about the density of people and the management of the land that was going on around the artifacts? What are you able to understand?
So it's a really interesting question, and it is a very good question to try and address, because as I'm sure everybody knows, the landscape is never static. It's always changing, and what we see as being a natural landscape is actually most likely very much a managed and deliberately maintained landscape with significant phases of climate change and environmental change. So if we focus on Ilkley Moor, then there's a variety of research which has been conducted, more historical through the 20th century and right up until the last 12 months or so, which is indicating that most likely the Ilkley Moor upland area was under significant tree coverage right up until around about the Romanization period. So around about 50 AD, there would still be significant tree coverage in that location. Most of the moorland development in this upland area will have been a result of land clearance throughout the Bronze Age and Neolithic for use as agricultural purposes. It's still a common area at present time, so farmers are allowed to graze their sheep on the area. It's prime sheep grazing area. That's mostly what it was likely cleared for. But it's also a significant source of stone, which was used during the Roman time in particular to construct buildings in the Ilkley area. There's a Roman fort in the area, which would have been constructed from stone directly quarried off the side of the moor. So in terms of what the contemporary landscape of these items may have been during the Neolithic and Bronze Age and Iron Age, woodland area, mixed woodland, with areas of open landscape which have been cleared for agricultural purposes, would be the most likely situation in that Ilkley Moor location. Population density is a very good question, but also very difficult to answer, because we don't see all of the evidence for populations, and there may well be settlement location which we haven't discovered yet in the area, but it would be a low level population density, not a high population density. So very, very sparse, small groups of people living in the area.
Good. Abby, Ben, anything to add to that? And remember your mics.
Hello everybody, can you hear me? I hope so. Sorry, I'm slightly late today. I've had one of those days. No, I don't think it's a huge amount that we can add to that. I think Ben made an important point that I'm sure probably everyone's aware of, that of different peat formation processes, and particularly the old argument and debate about the role of humans in clearing woodland and leading to blanket peatification and blanket peat spread. I don't know if actually anyone's recently seen, there's a paper just come out that is a modelling based paper that suggests that in fact most blanket peat is probably more related to climate than human activity. That's quite a recent publication. So really just to add that again in terms of these issues about peatland landscapes and all these discussions that we don't need to rehearse again about, you know, what's natural and baselines and things like that are rather problematic when it comes down to it, particularly in that link with human activity.
So, thank you. The next question or suite of questions is definitely around the impact, if you like, of modern peatland restoration on the archaeological record. So there's a couple of aspects to this. One is, what is the impact of restoration? And it's not just the physical direct damage potentially from big heavy machinery being around. Does the rising water levels bring difficulties? How confident are you that whilst it may protect the resource for longer, will you be able to find it in future? And do we need, I think a really important question is, do we need more guidance on managing for the archaeological resource as we plan restoration? And sorry, just to add this into the thinking, to what extent do we need to make considerations about if there's conflict and no way to resolve it, which trumps the other, biodiversity, climate, or archaeology? So between the three of you, try and tease out those. So maybe starting with the principle of how much is an impact is restoration on your archaeological resource.
I'll let Ben Geary jump in on this one to start with, I think.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean, this is we could have a whole session on this, I suppose. The best thing to say would be, and this is going right back really to the IUCN original report on the heritage historic environment in peatlands, and that is to make the statement that in broad terms, restoration should be beneficial for archaeological remains, very broadly. But again, that depends on what kind of remains we're talking about. If we're talking about more of the organic archaeological remains, which probably we associate more with peatlands, broadly restoration should be good for that in terms of long-term processes. I think there's lots I could say. I'm going to restrict myself for now. I think a concern at the moment, it's certainly one we have in Ireland, is the peatland restoration programs here, particularly the ones that are maybe reprofiling peatlands and re-wetting, seem to be taking no account of the archaeology that does survive in Irish bogs. And Irish bogs, the blanket bogs, what remains of them, we know have a lot of archaeology in them. So that has been a concern. It actually came up in Belfast last year, and it's not one yet that we've resolved. Wet Futures have tried to have some conversations over the last year about this. It tends to fall between stools. And again, I won't kind of go into that in depth, but really just to restate the point, I think the main importance is, and this is a conversation we've had over the years as well with, and again, there'll be some of the groups involved in restoration can be very good at this. The main things I think is having some archaeological input and involvement from the start. And the other point, and this actually came out of a discussion with DEFRA, who are aware of this as part of their peat pilots, the tenders that will be coming out. The important thing is, as archaeologists generally, we like people to avoid archaeology. We're not looking to dig archaeology up. We want people to avoid it and preserve it in situ. Problems tend to occur when that can't happen. So perhaps the most famous example of that would be Must Farm, which had to be dug because it couldn't be preserved in situ. Okay, that's not like peat cutting, that's an example thereof. So I think the important points is the communication. And again, Clifton, we've had this discussion, and I think it's something we always stress is it's that that discussion, having that discussion so we can avoid any potential clashes. For most sites and most peatlands, probably the chances of finding organic archaeology are rather low, but the implications of finding that archaeology are great. Again, with this farm, so the chances are if you find a bog body, very, very low chance. If you do find it or disturb it, you're going to have to dig it up. So archaeologists can help with both stages of that. And again, that's something we've tried to input into DEFRA's strategy moving forward. So hopefully that's something that we'll return to in conversations in the future. Sorry, I'll shut up now, Ben.
Well, just to say, there's a very definite interest that's been coming in over the last few months to the IUCN programme, asking for some sort of sharing of advice and thoughts on best practice around restoration and archaeology. So I think the appetite's there, and we should start pulling things together. And definitely some parts of the country, good practice is being developed. So that's on the cards, I think, get this year. Abby, anything more to say on that suite of issues about the conflicts between restoration and archaeology?
Not from my perspective. I should say my involvement on the Wet Futures project with Ben is largely around the sort of cultural representation of peatlands and their heritage. So one of the things that I'm involved with, which perhaps sort of links to this a little tangentially, is exploring how people perceive these landscapes and how they perceive or are aware of the heritage within that. And I think that's perhaps an important part of the debate as well, just how aware people are and the level of interest people have in the heritage that's in the landscape, the archaeology and the intangible heritage as well.
Now, typical, we're getting dozens of questions coming in, so looking at them in priority sense, there's a theme here about, in effect, past damaging activity by humans is what's shaped the landscape, but that in itself is archaeology. So I love the story of the 3,000-year-old peat stack in Lewis that's preserved under the peat, but similarly peat cutting banks that were busy reprofiling to make the bog survive. What do you see in terms of the importance of, in effect, preserving that damage as a record?
So it's a good question. It's a good point. Certainly, the historical uses and traditional uses of peatland are part of the heritage there. So we don't want to, just because something was different to the way we may utilise peatlands today, doesn't mean that those uses of peat are not part of the heritage. If we look in, as you say, in Lewis, it's a very ancient and indications for use of peat. Look across into Irish Midlands, as Ben knows, then the active peat cutting today, particularly on the family level peat cutting, is very much part of the heritage and identity of these populations. Whether we need to preserve those peat cutting banks, which are there historically and archaeologically not actively utilised today, so it's another question. Do we need to preserve the record of those? Do we need to preserve a cut peat face? Could be interesting to do so, but what benefit would that preservation give us? What additional information does that preservation of a cut peat face show us that we cannot record by other means, so by drawing, by recording, by photography, by modelling. So we could preserve it, we could record it and then utilise the peat in a different manner. Ben, do you want to feed into that? Because it's something directly associated to your area in the Irish Midlands, certainly.
Yeah, no, I guess. Yeah, I agree with that, Ben. And I suppose it just comes down to the two tenets of archaeology more broadly, or archaeological policy, and that is, as just referred to, preservation in situ or preservation by record. And both of these things more broadly, of course, are stated in various policy documents and in heritage devices, if you like. So we do kind of have that aspect of kind of a legal framework, if you like, for want of a better word. But no, you're right. I mean, the other thing is, not everything needs to be preserved necessarily. Again, that's a curatorial debate and that's personal. But you're right, to an extent, if we can't preserve a feature in a peatland by in situ, then it must be preserved by record. The problem starts is when we do neither, which has been an issue in Ireland, where we're not succeeding in preserving things by record, and probably not succeeding in preserving what's left in situ. So, which from a heritage point of view is utterly disastrous. So yeah, I mean, it's pragmatic, and we need to be pragmatic. Is the key thing. But again, it's communication, to come back to that as well.
We've come to the end of time. There's one very quick question. I'm sure it's probably the shortest answer. Somebody finds a piece of timber 2.5 meters down in a eroding gully in the Highlands. Who should they inform?
They should look for their local county archaeologist and give them a quick call, because the local county archaeologist or a local archaeologist from university or county, just report it to an archaeologist and they'll know what to advise, would be my suggestion on that one. If they aren't the person to contact, they will suggest somebody to you to contact, because that would be something of significant interest to look at, definitely.
Maybe we'll close there, but for the discussion going forward, there is a really interesting question there about what the archaeologists are learning about the use of the peatland itself by people. And this obviously from the fens in Cambridgeshire right across to the blanket bogs, our understanding of the way in which people actually did value the peatlands, and our modern misunderstanding of just how important peatlands were people, and perhaps for later discussion, that what you're learning about how much those various cultures through time actually valued the peatland in a way. Anybody got any final point to say? I've just got to do round up for where we go next, but is there anything more that Abby, Ben?
If I could add a couple of closing remarks, Clifton, that would be fabulous. It'll just be very quick. So, as I mentioned before, Ben, Gear, myself, Abby Flint, part of Wet Futures team, we have a Twitter handle, which is @WetFutures. We do every couple of months, I've been doing a wetland heritage chat. Hashtag is wetland heritage chat remind me, Abby, what day do we do those on?
It's usually on a Wednesday, and the next one's middle of January, but if you follow us on Twitter, we'll post it up.
And we'll discuss various aspects related to wetland heritage. So please, if anyone is interested, do follow us on Twitter and log into the chat. But the main thing I'd say, I know Ben's flagged it several times, Clifton's flagged it, communication, talking, that is the key going forward. So if anyone does encounter any heritage in peatlands, do report to a local archaeologist. If you do think there is need there for guidance around archaeology in peatland works, what to do if you encounter archaeology, drop us a line as part of Wet Futures, and we can try and aid in development of some materials for guidances going forwards. So keep the discussions going and keep chatting to people. I think that is the main message I'd like to get across regarding heritage in peatlands.
And Ben, if you put those links up onto the notice board as well, that would be great. Thank you, everybody. It's a perfect session to end the day. We've got at 6 o'clock, the exhibition hall opens. Do go in and see the exhibits and the chance to speak to the people providing the exhibits. And Oh, Ben has a quick question.
On that note, we have in the exhibition session starting in half an hour. We're launching Wet Futures Ireland are launching their peatland archaeology kind of handbook, which we've just produced with an artist in Ireland. So if you want to turn up, I'll be virtually sat there, and you can come and look what we've produced. That has some lovely illustrations of archaeology from Irish bogs. So that's just a quick plug. Thank you.
Brilliant. And we haven't got a beer session this time, but grab your glass and go and sit and have a natter with the two Bens and Abby. And thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you over at the exhibition hall.
Thank you.